Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to start off a little bit with some Penny Kelly. This is a John Claude Beyond Mystic. This is a Penny Kelly YouTube video. I think that till more people get on, we'll start with that. And
And also on Patreon at patreon.com/Penny Kelly. Let's give her a big warm welcome back to the show. Penny, how's it going?
It's going well. A little crazy, but it's going well.
Oh, same here. Same here. Very busy. Very busy.
Right.
You look great, though. You have a big smile, good energy.
Yeah, well, it's either, smile and laugh your way through or go crazy. So, all is well.
Very good. So, folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight on this live interactive show. We have a bit of time with us today, although we might be bumped by the little event, and Penny will tell us about that in a minute. But hopefully, we have the full hour, maybe a little bit longer, and we might even take some questions at the end for you guys. So, thank you so much for joining us. And at the same time, I'd like to explain to you why I'm doing this episode tonight. And what happened was, maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I started receiving emails and messages in my Patreon, and people was like, JC, did you see Penny Kelly's last look-see? She's changed her mind on silver. I'm like, I don't know, what are you guys talking about? So I'm like, okay, hold on. Let me call Penny in here, and let's put all of this back on track. So, Penny, welcome to the show. Of course, we'll get into gold and silver at some point here in your look-see, but let's start I guess with your last look-see. When you had the last show with me, we had entitled it, I think it was a little bit darker, so we had called it Storms, Clouds, Gathering. And of course tonight I switched it back to our regular topic of a break in the clouds, and I hope we have a little bit of a break in the clouds. What say you, Penny? How are things looking on your end of things?
Actually, they're looking pretty good. I think we're not around the corner. We're starting to turn the corner. That is something that keeps coming. It comes and then we fall off the wagon or whatever you call it, and then we get back on and keep on working, and it just keeps on moving in a positive direction. Not all the problems are solved. And I'm going to say, as of just today, this afternoon, one of the things we have a whole bunch of projects happening here, electrical work being done, work on the west entrance and regrading the land, and oh my gosh, bunch of stuff, painting. And so what struck me in the midst of all of this is this sort of I guess I would call it this sense or this realization that when I started, it was like, we just need to straighten out the government. And then it was, we need to fix the election. And then it was, we need to get rid of these masks. And we need to do all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And today it was sort of like a hold your horses kind of message. And I just stopped for a minute. I was looking out the window. And the message was, it takes a long time to evolve a civilization. You're evolving into something totally different. You can't go back. Stop trying to go back. Stop kicking and squealing and just hold still. And so I thought, okay, and then this word, I heard this word, it's a common, I hear it, regularly, but in this context it's about the evolution of the whole planet. And I thought, okay, so we have to evolve a new system. And that's really where it's at. So, I think if we can just keep on letting go of the old and getting creative with the new, we can make a fabulous world. In the meantime, we have to navigate a lot of stuff. A lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the censorship abounds, and it continues here on YouTube. Missy was in the chat asking me, "Hey, has anyone seen Michael Jaco? He's going to be on our show actually next week, I believe, but his YouTube channel was just terminated last week also. So yeah, another one bites the dust, so to speak. So I invited him on, and hopefully we can share with him, with you, the audience, when he comes onto the show, his new broadcasting platforms. So it is part of the deal here as we're here, and of course. Penny and I are pretty used to some of the keywords here not to use, so we'll try our level best here tonight to share with you all of this information without triggering too much here some of the nasty allegations.
Yeah, people can read between the lines very well now.
Right, they're getting used to it. In December, we were like, "What are you talking about, Aunt Maxine?" I'm like, "Oh, she's I think now everybody knows what we're talking about. Okay. So where do we want to start? So you see a shift. I like what you just said today too. Yeah, we're birthing a new civilization, and that takes time. I see that. And you and I have been harping on this in the last couple of episodes, where we're encouraging people to not be so stiff and to let go of the old system so that they can make way for the new. So I think that, again, saying that tonight is very important. Let's talk about maybe the fear factor here as well. We're seeing now in the last couple of weeks these bad actors, to call them that, crank up the volume again on fear. And so let's talk about that first, to try to maybe bring the needle down a little bit for the audience, and then we'll get into your look-sees. And I'm really going to leave you a room here to did it. I know you did it a little bit differently this month, so you can explain how and how you did it, and we'll get into the data afterwards. So let's talk about fear here and how we can bring that down a little bit.
Okay. Well, I think what we have to deal with is fear is something that you really can't ignore. It has to be faced. And when you're starting out with development of consciousness, we have 4 enemies. Those 4 enemies are fear, clarity, power itself, and old age. And you have to resist each one of those. And fear can only be handled when you lie and say, "Yeah, I see you there, sucker," and you keep going.
Right.
And wisely step around that fear, and that really is important. After a while, the things that frightened you no longer frighten you, partly because you're used to it, but also because the act of saying, "Yeah, I see you, and I'm going this way," going around it, that ends up revealing other options that you didn't see until you looked at the fear itself.
Right.
So the doors open, windows of opportunity open, visions open. You'll hear things. Stuff happens in your life that is so symbolic. Everything in our life we live in a symbol world. It's a world of form. All form is a symbol. And so you end up having to look at that. The other thing about fear that I would say, besides just looking at it, is people don't have permission to think and do for themselves, which is power. So power is the ability to decide and do. But if you're going to decide, you better be looking at all the factors. You can't be in a world of illusions,
If you want to,
or you're not going to get anywhere.
Watch what's going on in the live stream.
The whole idea of around fear is just give yourself permission to do what you need to do for you.
It's
Take
on
care
live
of
stream
yourself
right
first, and you can't do that in a snotty
live
way.
streaming on YouTube right now.
You can't do that in a mean way. You can't do that in a way that says, piss on you. I'm doing whatever I want to do. That isn't what it's about. It's that you take care of yourself gently, honestly, truthfully, quietly, and then you're ready to deal with other stuff. So.
Okay. Very good. And I think, I guess compassion, from a compassionate standpoint as well, for other people who are still in that fear. And of course, on the whole health situation, as the narrative continues to break, and we're seeing, and we'll get into that in the data here too, there are those who are still going to be holding on to that fear. That's what they know right now. So go ahead. Do you have more comments?
I was going to say, one of the outcomes that I see when I look ahead is And this is an outcome the cabal is hoping for, is that all the quote unquote, to use Hillary's term, the deplorables will take themselves out, and the only people left will be the ones who are smart, resilient, critical thinkers, able to, decide and do and make sense of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like there's a little bit of comfort in that, but if we end up losing people, we're going to cry. We're going to cry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So how do we? Okay. So explain to the audience here how your look-see is a little bit different this month. You took a different approach to it, so people know how and what to expect here as we unfold here the data from the bill.
Okay, so typically when I do a look-see, like when I started doing these years and years and years ago, just for myself, be like, okay, what do I see? Then I'd get my paper and pencil and I would write down something that would just come to me. And I started writing it down thinking, well, let me just watch and see what happens. And sure enough, I discovered that a lot of stuff I was seeing actually came to pass. When something didn't, I would dig into that and I would discover the mechanisms behind the scenes and be like, oh, that's why that didn't happen. And I could see how things changed over time. So this time when I was doing the look-see, I thought instead of all these little disconnected factoids, let me look at several big issues. And so I started out with a couple of things that I thought were really useful to see. But then I thought, you know what? I want to focus deeply on the dollar. I want to focus deeply on cryptos and gold and silver. And I want to see what's happening with the cabal. And I want to see what's happening over the summer. What are we doing? What are the people doing? And I was interested in what are the drivers that are pushing whatever I'm seeing. And so I was looking specifically at that. And so the thing, the first thing I asked, well, show me what's happening with the dollar. And so I saw this spindle with an arm sticking straight out, and the spindle was spinning around, and the arm had a handful of billions of dollars, and it was just spinning around and spewing dollars in every direction. And my first thought was, whoa, it's kind of a shock. But it struck me that was the money that Biden is giving out. That's the way money is being spent. Like, we can just print whatever we want. We don't have limits. It doesn't have to fit a budget. It doesn't have to be on it. So that was the first thing I saw. And then the very next month, I said, okay, let's go to May. What do I see? And I saw this big cork. And that was it, just cork. And I thought, oh, something's going to come along and put a cork in that bottle. And that money is going to stop. And so then I went to, that was the first half of May. And then I went to the last half of May and I said, okay, what's happening in the last half of May? I thought, let me drill down a little bit so I can see a little more detail. And I saw this thermometer, big thermometer, and the mercury went, meow, right to the bottom. And my thought was, something in the financial system is going to freeze up. And so, and then I kept watching, thinking people are going to freak out, but they didn't. They kept right on buying, they kept right on investing, they kept right on spending, and I was just stunned. It's like, well, what are you doing? The money system is freezing up. People either didn't know or didn't care, or felt that they were going to get ahead of it. That was actually quite a bit of it. And there was also an attitude that said, no, this is only May. I was looking at late May, early June. We can't have a financial crash at this time of year. We have them in October. And I was like,
right.
I don't think that's I don't think that that's very good thinking. But then, you know, I went on to July. People were really living on financial fantasies. That really bothered me. I don't know what's happening out there, why people, if they don't know how the system works, if they don't understand the checks and balances that are in place around the financial system, if they're not watching what's happening in the rest of the world, we cannot carry on like we're the be all and the end all and we're not affected by what anybody else is doing. And right now, half of the rest of the world is saying, no, we don't want dollars. They are not accepting dollars and they're not trading in dollars. And I think that some of that spewing of dollars is to get us to believe that, you know, dollar is a distraction move. That dollars are okay and they're plentiful and we're fine. And I don't think that's the case at all.
Wow.
So,
and what do you think, may I interrupt you and ask you, what do you think those fantasies are? You're saying living in a financial fantasy.
You know, the very first thing that struck me was the fantasy that my pension was okay. The next thing was that I could live on cryptos. And we'll come to cryptos, which I then had further stuff happen after the look-see.
Okay.
But it was this idea that we are past the kind of crashes or recessions or depressions that occurred in 1929 and 2008. That can't happen. That's the illusion. And the other half of the illusion is that it doesn't matter what the rest of the world does.
Right.
And I have to say, in a world where everybody's communicating and everybody's watching what everybody else is doing, you have to be, we're connected.
Right.
This is part of the world coming together. And so we can't operate in a vacuum or as if we're the only ones making the decisions and calling the shots.
Mm-hmm.
So here,
okay.
So I got into, did you have another question?
No, I understand now. I wasn't sure what you meant about the fantasy. So that would also entail that at some point, these people are going to have a rude awakening. So I'm not sure if you're in your timeline, if you've seen that or.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Okay. So keep going here. I see where you're going. Okay.
So I went on to, you know, look. By the time I got to the end of July, it actually, I wasn't sure what I was looking at: heat exhaustion or just mental emotional exhaustion. People were just like eyes glazed over. I don't care. I don't want to hear. I don't want to know. And I thought, oh, wow, we're beginning to hit the wall in terms of our ability to be resilient and to keep moving forward. And so everybody was sad, everybody was overwhelmed, everybody was tired of everything. And in August, it looked like there was a lot of people that were past their limit. They were either dropping dead, I hate to say that, or they were dropping out of the whole system, or they were just dropping into this depression that was it was discouraging to see. Wow. And the financial system, which had just kept limping along, was now, it looked like it was obviously going down. And I thought, isn't that interesting? People said, no, we can't have a financial crash now, even though it started in May. It didn't really become obvious to people who aren't used to looking deeply until September. And then it was right on schedule from that point on. So at that point, I thought, okay, let's look at the crypto economy, because I was worried that the crypto was part of the financial fantasy.
Right. And in the last interview you did too, you weren't sure anymore about crypto, having had asked people to look into it and then thinking, oh, maybe it was a trap. Those were the words. And folks, bring that back up again too, because if you haven't seen that episode, it'll bring a lot of context to what we're discussing tonight. So let me just show you that on screen and bring that link back down very quickly for you. And Penny, before we get into the crypto talk too, let me just quickly thank our PayPal jar donators. There's a few already who just come in, and thank you so much everyone for that. Really appreciate it. Of course, we're demonetized here on YouTube, and we're doing our best, so we are 100% viewer funded. So if you guys like these shows, please do consider.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah.
This one.
That thought has really taken the telephone pole upside the head more than once.
Right, exactly. Dakins Valenzuela, I love that name. Merci beaucoup. She says, just to support you, Jean-Claude. Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Walter, thank you so much. And he says, love to have Penny on. Thanks for all you do. And my name's Elmo. Oh, thank you so much, Walter. I appreciate that. All right. Okay, let's get into the crypto. Well, very quickly, share with the audience who might not have seen the show what your thoughts were in the Storm Clouds Gathering episode about maybe where crypto we're going, and then we'll move forward to this look and see if you're validating it or if we're changing the
Okay. So what I saw, so this is going to sound discouraging at first, but it ends up being good. Okay. So back then, what I saw was that cryptos dropped. There were 2 drops, and they were fairly big. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. So I wanted to see, do I still see, I thought we had already had 1 drop. So while I'm looking, I started looking, I think it was on the 4th of April, Easter Sunday is when I started looking. And I thought, I think we've already had 1 drop. Do I see another one? So then I'm looking at the April crypto, and it was perking along, and I thought, wow, there's still a lot of people waiting to become millionaires. And the attitude was that the gains they'd already had were not enough, and that there was a worry. I developed this how much is enough? At what point do you have enough sense to take a little bit off table? Right. Just waiting for more. At what point do you say, okay, that's enough. I've got enough to live on. And so it was, the feeling I had was watching a lot of people who were into crypto who were really not understanding how to think about money, how to handle money, how to prepare for wealth. The wealth is a lot of work. Let me tell you, I have been a consultant for some very, very, very wealthy people. And the work that they do to try to manage that is more than a full-time job.
Yeah.
With the idea that you're just going to make money and sit back on your laurels. And one thing is going to happen is the government is going to come in and say, you owe us 50% of that. And then it gets eaten up by all sorts of little things. Oh, I got to have this. Oh, I got to have that. First thing you know, you're back to looking for a job. Wow.
And then you have to deal with the tax man.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, before we get into crypto, you just did the first part here. What's the story with the IRS? We're hearing reports that a lot of people are not filing. Is it going to be dissolved? Are people going to have to file their taxes this year? Have you looked into that? And what's your...
Little bit.
Yeah. Do you want to mention it now, or is there a place later on in your timeline that makes sense?
Let me finish the cryptos, and then we'll go to that. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay. So there was just this whole feeling that people were not prepared to be millionaires or more, billionaires, etc. So then in May. I wrote in May there was a downturn, but I didn't think it was too drastic. But in the day that I posted this, which I think was the 15th, it dropped and kept on dropping. And I thought it had gone down 9,000. I said maybe in the range of a $7,000 to $9,000 drop, and it really dropped closer to 15. And I'm not sure what it's doing now. I haven't looked at it for a day or two. But there was this sense of impatience that followed that drop in this uncertainty. A lot of people were uncertain regarding whether to cash out altogether. And the question I was asking, well, what are they thinking? And I had an instant picture of the...
Okay, I'm going to pause it now. And I would recommend everybody should go and watch that video. She's a brilliant lady. She's started out as an engineer at Chrysler, and then had this, he calls it a Kundalini experience. And she now is a naturopathic doctor. She's really smart, and she's also a psychic. So I think that she's got a lot of really valuable information that we should be aware of. And so anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a nastygram is what we're going to go through. This is one I sent to a federal judge. Be prepared for some bad language. Notice when I send it, I sent it also to Trump. I sent it to the Attorney General. I sent it to the Committee on the Judiciary, Chuck Grassley, and the Chief Judge of the court. That's the district court. And I've sent ones before to her too, so she knows about these. But anyways, I don't send these out all the time. These are, just sometimes. This judge, well, you'll see what he's been doing once we get into this nastygram. I sent him one of my notice and demands back in 2013, and so he's got no excuse. And so I just get, and the important thing with these things is don't make any threats or anything that could be viewed to be a threat. And I've also got, what we'll see is what the clerk sent me back. Because they look, it's kind of a long story. I'll tell you about what that when we get at the end, and I'll show you what the clerk sent me. Anyways, so this is to this John McBride. He's one of the judges in the Fort Worth Division of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas. And so he's a federal judge. He's actually kind of like, they don't really have a chief judge over there, but he kind of is. And he kind of runs the show over in that Fort Worth Division. Barbara M.G. Lynn, if you see her there, she's the chief judge of the Northern District of Texas. So there's only one chief judge. And he's kind of like the guy that runs the Fort Worth Division of the Northern District of Texas. But so I always send this out to lots of people, so there's lots of witnesses. And so there's going to be a little bit of bad language, and after that I'll just every paragraph ends with this, by the way, or almost every paragraph. Anyways, it says, you, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, are noticed that I previously accepted your oath of office in the John McBride notice and demand 09-15-12 that was served on you by registered mail, a true copy of which, together with proof of service, is attached here to, all of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, so fuck your oath, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, motherfucking son of a bitch. No disrespect to dogs intended. And and then from now on, I'll just say MFSOB. So everybody knows when I say MFSOB, that what I'm saying. So try to keep the bad language down. Anyways, you, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that if you or one of your coward pigs wants a piece of me, just name a date, time, and location. I'll come armed. We can settle it for once and for all. Because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. Paragraph 3. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that I already know that you cowards will never take me up on that because you're cowards. And you do your best to make sure I'm not armed, so I have no way to defend myself when your pigs assault me and your pigs operate in packs. And it's all with your approval and consent, with the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member judicial horse selling their just us because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, mother, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. And then I have a Chisholm versus Georgia court case citation. In doing this, I shall have occasion incidentally to events how true it is that states and governments were made for man, and at the same time how true it is that his creatures and servants have first deceived, next vilified, and at last oppressed their master and maker. And then another case citation from the same case. A state like a merchant makes a contract, a dishonest state like a dishonest merchant willfully refuses to discharge it. And then it goes on. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that the word PIG is an acronym, which stands for persons in government who intend to perjure their oaths, which means you're a pig too. Because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that I have never in my life breached the peace, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. Paragraph 6. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your coward DHS, DPS pigs, and your coward border pigs, and your various coward city pigs, and your coward U.S. Marshals, and your coward sheriff pigs, and your coward FBI pigs have breached the peace hundreds of times while operating in their private capacity as revenue officers. And this is a Tomlin's Law Dictionary edition citation. If they are administered, all oaths must be lawful, if allowed by common law or some statute, if they're administered by a person in a private capacity or not duly authorized, they're quorum non judice and void. And that's citing Book 3 and 4 of the Institutes and the Laws of England, which goes back to the 1500s. And so the point is they can operate in their private capacity. In other words, when they're perjuring their oath, they're not in their official capacity, they're in their private capacity, and you have to understand that. Anyways, under the Federal Tax Lien Act of 1966, they're under the definitions of motor vehicle, a self-propelled vehicle which is registered for highway use. A security means any bond, debenture, note. See, they're looking for Federal Reserve notes, okay? Or note or certificate or any other evidence of indebtedness issued by a corporation or a government or a political subdivision thereof, negotiable instrument or money with interest, coupons or registered form, share of stock, voting trust certificate or any certificate of interest or participation in certificate of deposit or receipt for, temporary or interim certificate for, or warrant, or right to subscribe to or purchase any of the foregoing, and then a negotiable instrument or money. And that's the Federal Tax Lien Act of 1966, located at 80 Stat 1130 and 1131. And then it goes on, with their unlawful arrest when I had not breached the peace and there was no lawful court order, and any restraint, however slight, upon another's liberty to come and go as one pleases constitutes an arrest. And a legal arrest is an assault and battery. The person so attempted to be restrained of his liberty has the same right to use force in defending himself as he would in repelling any other assault and battery. Each person has the right to resist an unlawful arrest. In such case, the person attempting the arrest stands in the position of a wrongdoer and may be resisted by the use of force as in self-defense. Similarly, a person cannot be convicted by resisting a peace officer in the execution of his duty unless the officer was acting strictly within the limits of his power and duty. If the officer makes an unlawful arrest, then there's a common law right to resist that arrest. This is actually Police Manual of Arrest, Seizure, and Interrogation, H edition, by the Honorable Roger E. Salhaney. That's a Canadian book. Okay, so for all you Canadians, that's good for Canada. But it's a common law right, so that's good anywhere. And it's all with your approval and consent. And the approval and consent are your bought and paid for bar member judicial horse selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. And it goes on. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your U.S. Congress pigs have given your coward DHS, DPS pigs, and your coward border pigs, and your coward U.S. Marshal pigs, and your coward FBI pigs, and your various coward city pigs the right to assault, kidnap, falsely imprison, even murder anybody they want, as long as they can do it in good faith. And this is 18 U.S.C. 2707. Defense, good faith reliance on a court warrant or order, a grand jury subpoena, a legislative authorization, or a statutory authorization, including a request of a governmental entity under Section 2703F of this title, or a request of an investigative or law enforcement officer under Section 2518.7 of this title, or a good faith determination of Section 2511.3 of this title, permitted the conduct complained of, is a complete defense to any civil or criminal action brought under this chapter or any other law. So they could just say, oh, I had good faith. And the same thing applies in your Texas region of your criminal corporation. No evidence obtained by an officer or other person in violation of any provisions of the Constitution or laws of the state of Texas or of the Constitution or laws of the United States of America shall be admitted in evidence against the accused in a trial of any criminal case. And again, that sounds so wonderful. And then it goes to paragraph B. It is an exception to the provisions of subsection A of this article that the evidence was obtained by a pig acting in objective good faith reliance upon a warrant issued by a neutral magistrate based on probable cause. And that's Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Article 38.23. And the same thing applies in your Arizona region of your criminal corporation. And a person commits unlawful imprisonment by knowingly restraining another person. In any prosecution for unlawful imprisonment, it is a defense that the restraint was accomplished by a peace officer or detention officer acting in good faith in the lawful performance of his duty. Arizona Revised Statutes. And the same thing applies in all regions of your criminal corporation, and it's all with your approval and consent, with the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member judicial whores selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, Satanist MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. And then I have that Chisholm versus Georgia cites again. So we'll kind of briefly go over some of that to speed this thing up. Anyways, this thing is 22 pages long. Let's just go and see if there's any questions. Okay, so anyways, keep on moving. Nobody has any questions. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that whenever a judge is dealing with a statute, he's no longer a judge in his official capacity, but becomes a bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, operating in his private capacity. And when acting to enforce a statute and subsequent amendments to the present date, the judge of municipal court is acting as an administrative officer, not in a judicial capacity. Courts administrating or enforcing statutes do not act judicially. They're always enforcing statutes, but merely ministerially, but merely acts as an extension, as an agent of the involved agency, and not only in a ministerial and not in a discretionary capacity. Now, that's why I say file bar grievances against these bar member scum. That's always a bar member scum that's behind anything that's happening to you. Find out who the bar member scum is and file a bar grievance. The Supreme Court in every state regulates the bar. And if they know the law, and when you start bringing that stuff up, they get rattled. They get slammed. I can tell you, they get that bar grievance sent to them, and they can't say anything to anybody about it. And there's a Randy Kelton in Texas said that they bar grieved a public pretender, and he was begging the judge to get off the case, saying, I cannot work this way with the sword of Damocles hanging over my head. Anyways, bar grieved those sons of guns. Sons of bitches is what they are. And I'm even filing bar grievances against judges. They can't be a judge if they're not a member of the bar. And so I file bar grievances against judges too. Randy Kelton is a guy that's in Texas, and he's pretty sharp. He says if they get 3 bar grievances, they're done. They lose their bond. If they don't have a bond, they can't practice law. And you can bar grieve law firms, and that's another thing. A lot of these lawyers, like these city lawyers or something like that, will get these cities will hire a law firm. So then they'll have this law firm. One member of the law firm will be the city attorney, and another member of the law firm will be a prosecutor. And so I file a bar grievance against the prosecutor, a city attorney, and then I find out who the partners are in that law firm, and I file bar grievances against them too. And I haven't been doing that long enough to know what kind of result it gets. I guess we'll see. But I filed a bunch of bar grievances recently. Anyways, and you have to bring up the right issues. Anyways, next week we're going to be talking about bar grievances and going into details on what to say and what to be careful about. That'll be next weekend. It is the accepted rule not only in the state courts but in the federal courts as well that when a judge is enforcing administrative law, they're described as mere extensions of the administrative agency for superior reviewing purposes as a bought and paid for whore. Judges who become involved in enforcement of mere statutes, civil or criminal in nature or otherwise, act as mere clerks of the involved agency. And your bought and paid for bar member whores, clerks masquerading as a judge, sit there and play stupid so they can go ahead and facilitate the assaults, kidnappings, false imprisonments, and even murders as long as it's in good faith. And the same thing applies in your Texas region, your criminal corporation, your Arizona region of your criminal corporation, and all regions of your criminal corporation. And it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member judicial whores selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. Ooh, what happened there? Okay. Moving along here. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, and notice that bought and paid for clerks masquerading as a judge cannot do anything judicial like issue warrants or orders, and if they attempt to do so, it's a fraud and a nullity. Ministerial officers are incompetent to receive grants of judicial power from the legislature. Their acts in attempting to exercise such powers are necessarily nullities. Therefore, it's a kangaroo court. A kangaroo court is a court termed as a sham legal proceeding in which a person's rights are totally disregarded, in which the result is a foregone conclusion because of the bias of the court or other tribunal, and a void judgment. Where there's no law, where there's no jurisdiction, there's no judge, the proceeding is as nothing, such has been the law from the days of Marshal Saya. A void judgment is one which has no legal force or effect whatever. It's an absolute nullity. Its invalidity may be asserted by any person whose rights are affected at any time, at any place. It need not be attacked directly, but may be attacked collaterally whenever and wherever it is interposed. A void judgment, insofar as it purports to be a pronouncement of a court, is an absolute nullity. A void order may be attacked either directly or collaterally at any time. And it's all with your approval and consent, with the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member judicial whores selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. And I have those 2 Chisholm versus Georgia cases. And it goes on. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your pigs have assaulted me, kidnapped me, falsely imprisoned me, and your United Nations bail priest whores on the bench, clerks masquerading as a judge, are their accomplices, and it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member judicial whores selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended, and I got those 2 Chisholm versus Georgia cases. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as judge to notice that I travel on the land of Texas and elsewhere, which I have previously served you Satanist MFSOBs with documents saying I'm not interested in being in your criminal corporation called United State. And this is in Chisholm versus Georgia again. A state does not owe its origin to the government of the United States in the highest or any of its branches. It was in existence before it. It derives its authority from the same pure and sacred source as itself, the voluntary and deliberate choice of the people. A state is altogether exempt from the jurisdiction of the courts of the United States or from any other exterior authority unless in the special instances where the general government has power derived from the Constitution itself. The question to be determined is whether this state, so respectable and whose claims soar so high, is amenable to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court of the United States. This question, important in itself, will depend on others, more important still, and may perhaps be ultimately resolved into one no less radical than this. Do the people of the United States form a nation? By that law, the several states and governments spread over the world are considered as forming a society, not a nation. And that's Chisholm versus Georgia. Anyways, that's actually either this weekend or next weekend. We're going to go through a little bit about the Law of Nations, and it's the book by Vattel. And I'm not sure. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to do it this weekend or next weekend. But and I might even save it for another time because there's some pretty interesting stuff in there about what is required for a nation. And so the important thing to understand is that the states are we the people. And then there's this other dissenting opinion in Downs versus Bidwell. 2 national governments exist, one to be maintained under the Constitution with all its restrictions, the other to be maintained by Congress outside and independently of that instrument. But your coward pigs went ahead and assaulted me and kidnapped me and falsely imprisoned me in your United Nations Bill Priest horse like you, Terry Means, Donald Cosby, Thomas Lowe, Reed O'Connor, Jeffrey Curtin, Joe Fish, Paul Stickney, Cummings, and others became their accomplices under their satanic unidroid-controlled and regulated Uniform Commercial Code. Whenever the Uniform Commercial Code creates a presumption with respect to a fact or provides that a fact is presumed, the trier of fact must find the existence of the fact unless and until evidence is introduced that supports a finding of its non-existence. That's in their Uniform Commercial Code. Remember, I said under their satanic unidroid controlled and regulated, because that's international law, and you don't want to go there. So I'm saying it's theirs. In an action with respect to an instrument, the authenticity of and the authority to make each signature on the instrument are admitted unless specifically denied in the pleadings. If the validity of the signature is denied in the pleadings, the burden of establishing validity is on the person claiming validity, but the signature is presumed to be authentic and authorized. So what they do is they forge your signature onto a contract and then presume it to be lawful and let you defeat it. The following rules apply in an action on any certificated security against the issuer unless specifically denied in the pleadings. Each signature on the security certificate and in a necessary endorsement is admitted, and that's several. That's UCC 3.308 proof of signatures, and then UCC 8.114 rules concerning the certificated security. So they forge your signature onto a bond, and then they sell you into slavery. That's exactly what they do. When you assaulted me with their Roman cult sestike trust, but individuals, when acting as representatives of a collective group, cannot be said to be exercising their personal rights and duties, nor be entitled to their purely personal privileges. Rather, they assume the rights, duties, and privileges of the artificial entity or association which their agents or officers, and they're bound by its obligations. For your Roman cult handlers, and yet it was found difficult to set bounds to ecclesiastical ingenuity. That's the Roman cult, folks. For when they're driven out of all their former holes, they devised a new method of conveyance by which the lands were granted not to themselves directly, but to nominal PIPs to the use of the religious houses. That's the Roman cult, folks. Thus distinguishing between the possession and the use and receiving the actual profits, while the season of the land remained in the nominal PIP, who was held by the courts of equity, then under the direction of the clergy. That's the Roman cult, folks. Is there something wrong with this picture? The Roman cult makes the presumption and the Roman cult gets to judge. Isn't that convenient? To be bound in conscience to account to assess to use for the rents and emoluments of the estate. That's taxes, folks. And it is to these inventions that our practitioners are indebted for the introduction of uses and trusts, the foundation of modern conveyancing. This is all Roman law. Tomlin's Law Dictionary, 1835 edition, volume 2, under the definition of mort main. It's interesting that that law dictionary doesn't have page numbers on it. So the only way I can reference this is that it's under the definition of mort main. And that is probably like 3 or 4 pages. You're going to have to just go through there and find it. Legal estate to be an necessity use. That's in the district code of law for the District of Columbia at 31 Stat 1432. And you have instructed your bought and paid for a horse selling their just us clerks masquerading as a judge to presume everybody is a cesticate trust under Chapter 3, 31 Stat 1230. Presumption of death. They presume you're dead. Every taxpayer is a cesticate trust having sufficient interest in preventing abuse of the trust to be recognized in the field of this court's prerogative jurisdiction. That's a summary from Inri Bolins. A citizen of the United States is a civilly dead entity operating as co-trustee and co-beneficiary of the public charitable trust, the Constructive Cesticate Trust of the United States, Inc., under the 14th Amendment, which upholds the debt of the USA and US Inc. And that's a summary of 5 pages of congressional record. With the objective of selling me into slavery. He, the prisoner, has, as a consequence of his crime, not only forfeited his liberty, but all his personal rights, except those which the law and its humanity afford him. He is, for the time being, a slave of the state. And it's all with your approval and consent, and I'm not going to rest till I see these pigs and their pig bar member whores do that little dance they do at the end of a common law rope. You lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. And then there's a cite from Deuteronomy 24:7. If a man be found stealing any of his brethren of the children of Israel, maketh merchandise of him or selleth him, then that thief shall die. And thou shalt put evil away from among you. Now, this might be considered a threat, but I'm saying at the end of a common law rope. So I would bring it to a common law jury, and that's why it's called a common law rope. So I threaten them with the law. You can threaten them with the law. But actually, if you talk to Randy Kelton, he doesn't even do that. He goes for the juggler. He goes in there, sets him up, and he's got a website called Rule of Law Radio. I would highly recommend anybody in Texas, for sure, to go and listen to his information. He's got some great information. And when I get back to Texas, I'm going to get him to help me with some things. And so we'll see what happens. But he doesn't tell them anything. He goes in there, he sets them up, and he when they take the bait, then he goes for the juggler. And but he's got the problem is he uses Texas codes. He uses their own codes. And so if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. That's what happens when you have martial law. They assault you with their codes. And so anyways, we can assault them with their codes. We'll assault them with common law. We'll assault them every way we can. And then after we get done assaulting them with their codes, maybe we'll do some common law stuff and get his neck stretched. Again, I'm glad it's not up to me. It's up to a common law jury. But anyways, people need to wake up. Let's see if there's any comments. Do you have any comments? I do have some people here, and so they may have some comments. Yes, you're right. The rules of civil procedure, they are Roman law. That's civil law. Civil law and Roman civil law are convertible phrases and mean municipal law. There's 33 people online right now on the live stream. Anyways, so keep moving here. Therefore, I'll always be traveling heavily armed, and if your coward pigs want to unlawfully arrest me, we'll settle it for once and for all. Because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, Satanist MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that I'm entitled to a Republican form of government under your piece of shit Constitution that you completely ignore, unless you have some political agenda. And that's Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. The United States shall guarantee to every state of this union a Republican form of government, which fails to include any military commissioners operating under General Orders 100. And this is Article 13 of the Libre Code, General Orders 100. Military jurisdictions is two kinds. First, that which is conferred and defined by statute. Second, that which is derived under the common law of war. Military offenses under the statute law must be tried in the manner therein directed, but military offenses which do not come within the statute must be tried and punished under the common law of war. And so it's all military commissioners. And then there's Field Manual 27-5, United States Army and Navy Manual of Civil Affairs. In 1947, Section 2, it says civil affairs, military government personnel are charged with the following: establishing an administration of military commissions, provost marshals, special military government courts, and their jurisdiction and procedure, supervision, control, or closing, if necessary, of local criminal and civil courts, supervision of members of the local bar, decisions as to modifications or suspension of local criminal and civil laws. So again, when you're under martial law, it's all, remember, it's what that Judge A.H. Ellett at the Utah Supreme Court said. They only operate at the pleasure of a military governor, military commander. And a Republican form of government fails to include any star chambers. Whoops. And a Republican form of government fails to include any star chambers. The corrupt Star Chamber courts of England required respondents to have counsel. Star Chamber stood for swiftness and arbitrary power. It's a limitation on the common law. Now, Randy Kelton told me recently that if they give you a public pretender, that's okay. That's okay. Then you bar grieve the bastard, and either he's going to do what you want or he's going to get another one. So he'll sit there and sit down and tell you what the way it's going to go, and then you sit down and tell him, no, it's not going to go that way. You're going to really fix this problem, or else I'm going to bar grieve you. And a Republican form of government fails to include any statutes, codes, rules, or regulations, because all statutes, codes, rules, or regulations are edicts under martial law as described herein, but only to subjects of the enemy and aliens. But in considering the question before us, it must be borne in mind there is no law of nations standing between the people of the United States and their government and interfering with their relation to each other. The powers of the government and the rights of the citizens under it are positive practical relations plainly written down. The people of the United States have delegated to it certain enumerated powers and forbidden it to exercise others. And this is a cite from Chisholm versus Georgia. In despotic governments, the government has usurped in a similar manner both upon the state and the people. That sounds like martial law, folks. Hence, all arbitrary doctrines and pretensions concerning the supreme, absolute, uncontrollable power of government in each man is degraded from the prime rank which he ought to hold in human affairs. In the latter, the state as well as the man is degraded. In both of the degradations, striking instances occur in history, in politics, and in common life, and it's happening here now. In a Republican form of government, fails to include any bought and paid for clerks masquerading as judges. We already read those cases. which means I have a common law right to travel with my private property on the public highway, guaranteed under the 9th Amendment to your piece of shit Constitution that you completely ignore unless you have some political agenda. And you, John McBride, the bought and paid for clerk masquerading as a judge, are busy imposing your Euless pigs buddies and your Grapevine pigs buddies and your Bedford pig buddies military despotism on me, because I should know better to think that you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB, no disrespected dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your oath of office is to me. And because it brings into action and enforces this great and glorious principle that the people are the sovereign of this country, and consequently that fellow citizens and joint sovereigns cannot be degraded by appearing with each other in their own courts to have their controversies determined. That's why we need to convene our common law juries, folks. And because my ancestors were given birth in the Virginia colony and the colony of Virginia and the colony of South Carolina prior to the War of Independence, pursuant to the maxims of law, the power which is derived cannot be greater than that from which it is derived. Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856 edition, and your edicts under martial law, civil laws, cannot be used to destroy my rights. The right of blood and kindred cannot be destroyed by any civil law. Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856 edition. Because my ancestors wrote the Constitution for the United States of America as evidence in the Statement of Original Status that is in the Affidavit of Corporate Denial 06-2013, which is recorded with the Pinal County Recorder at fee number 2013-032373, which is now public policy and the unrebutted truth, and that is found in the John H. McBride Notice and Demand, which was served on you by registered mail, a true copy of which, together with proof of services attached hereto, all of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety. But you and I both know you have no intention of honoring your oath of office, as evidenced by the fact you've taken it upon yourself to get all my cases that get filed, and you have repeatedly denied me justice because your U.S. citizen slaves that insist on assaulting me with your edicts under their military dictatorship have repeatedly done so. And you and your bar member pig buddies in the FBI and your U.S. Attorney's Office refuse to enforce your piece of shit felony statutes unless you have some political agenda. 18 U.S.C. 241, 242, 247, 1701, 1702, 1726, and 1091. And it's all with your approval and endorsement, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office. You lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB, no disrespected dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, and notice that it is impossible for you to make a legal determination for me without representing me. And you have no authority to represent me, but you have clearly demonstrated that you intend to assault me with your U.S. citizen slave status for your Roman cult handlers, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB, no disrespected dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that it's impossible for you to accuse me of anything without perjuring your oath of office, because my ancestors authored the Constitution of the United States of America, which is your authority to operate. And this is Yickwo versus Hopkins. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But in our system, all sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government. Sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts, which means you operate under my authority. A sovereign is exempt from suit, not because of any formal conception or obsolete theory, but on the logical and practical ground that there can be no legal right as against the authority that makes the law on which the right depends. U.S. Supreme Court. Both of these are U.S. Supreme Court cases. And you are protected, and you are required to protect my rights. And it is true that at the common law, the duty of the Attorney General is to represent the king, he being the embodiment of the state. But under the democratic form of government now prevailing, the people are king. So the Attorney General's duties are to that sovereign rather than to the machinery of government. But you intend that your Texas bar member buddies subject me to the deprivation of my right to justice under color of their vexatious litigant codes in violation of your piece of shit US 18 U.S.C. 241 and 242 that you refuse to enforce unless you have some political agenda, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB. Don't get me going. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your pig, United Nations bail priest, bar member whores masquerading as judges, know that your coward pigs routinely engage in false arrest, false imprisonment, but you want to sit there and play stupid so you can collect your royalties because your coward pigs bring in so much business. Because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. And this is the only thing the plaintiff needs to do is allege false arrest is either one, that the defendant cop made an arrest or imprisonment, or two, that the defendant cop affirmatively instigated, encouraged, incited, started a fight, or caused the imprisonment or false arrest. When the plaintiff person has shown that he was arrested, imprisoned, or restrained of his liberty by the defendant pig, the law presumes it to be unlawful. The burden is upon the defendant pig to show that the arrest was by authority of law. Any arrest made without proper warrant, signed by a judge, backed up by an affidavit from two persons that states under penalty of perjury you have broken a contract or hurt someone, if challenged by a defendant, is presumptively invalid. The burden is upon the state to justify it as authorized by statute and does not violate constitutional provisions and or human rights. In the case of illegal arrest, the officer pig must keep within the law at his peril. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that since your coward border pigs and your coward DHS DPS pigs and your coward U.S. Marshal pigs and your coward city pigs and your coward sheriff pigs obviously intend to engage in warfare against me no matter what I say or do. A mixed war is one which is made on one side by public authority, the other by mere private persons. And if your pigs want to assault me with their unlawful arrest when there's no breach of the peace or no lawful warrant, I shall be heavily armed, and we'll settle it right then and right there for once and for all with your coward pigs and any bloodsheds on your hands. And it will all be with your consent, approval, and consent, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. And it's got those two Chisholm versus Georgia cases there again. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that I have the right to resist an unlawful arrest with lethal force if necessary. An illegal arrest is an assault and battery. The person so attempted to restrain of his liberty has the same right to use force in defending himself as he would in repelling any other assault and battery. Each person has a right to resist an unlawful arrest. In such case, the person attempting the arrest stands in the position of a wrongdoer and may be resisted by the use of force, as in self-defense. Similarly, a person cannot be convicted of resisting a peace officer in the execution of his duty unless the officer is acting strictly within the limits of his power and duty. If the officer makes an unlawful arrest, then there's a common law right to resist that arrest. And I shall be heavily armed, and I shall exercise my right to resist any unlawful arrest by your coward DHS DPS pigs and your coward border pigs and your coward U.S. Marshal pigs and your coward FBI pigs and your coward city pigs and your coward sheriff pigs, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, let's see, we're on page 12, at the bottom of page 12. And the total thing's 106 pages, but that's got some attachments and stuff. So we're not going to be reading all of that, I guarantee you. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your pigs have assaulted me, a man, for the crimes of the fraudulently created Sesticade Trust and pillaged my property when your Kerrville pigs seized my laptop computer and carrying contents and engaged in the theft of my property with their military uniforms and tactics are designed to be intimidating and terrorizing, and you and your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member whore, John H. McBride, and others are their accomplices in their war crimes when you, John H. Bride, dismissed the case 415 CB 772 and again as 417 CB 167 in the Northern District of Texas because I failed to pay your extortion filing fee. Thereby, this is Clearfield Trust Company. Governments descend to the level of a mere private corporation and take on the characteristics of a mere private citizen, where private corporate commercial paper, Federal Reserve notes, and securities checks is concerned. For purposes of suits, such corporations and individuals are regarded as entities entirely separate from government. That's Clearfield Trust Company versus United States, U.S. Supreme Court. Governments lose their immunity and descend to the level of private corporations when involved in commercial activity, enforcing negotiable instruments as in fines, penalties, assessments, bails, taxes. The remedy lies in the hands of the state and its municipalities seeking remedy. Thereby demonstrated that you intend to perjure your oath of office and that you absolutely no intention of being a judge, that you intend to be a bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge as described herein, and by using my failure to make a contract with you so you would sit there and play stupid in violation of your edicts under your military dictatorship, and because you're bought and paid for a whore selling your just us, intend to violate my right to justice under your color of your codes, rules, and regulations, and violation of your piece of shit felony statutes that you refuse to enforce unless you have a political agenda, 18 U.S.C. 241, 242, and engage in genocide against state citizens in violation of your piece of shit felony statutes that you refuse to enforce unless you have a political agenda, 18 U.S.C. 1091, which you intended to do to get your bar member buddies in Texas to make me a vexatious litigant so you could deprive me of my right to justice, and you intend to subject me to the deprivation of my right to a Republican form of government guaranteed by your piece of shit Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your coward border pigs have assaulted me, a man, for the crimes of your fraudulently created Sesticate Trust, and are taking reprisals against me because of my political opinions, and their military uniforms and tactics are designed to be intimidating and terrorizing, and your bought and paid for a Roman cult bar member whore Cummings and others are their accomplices in their war crimes, and they coerced me to give evidence against myself when your bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a Judge Cummings dismissed case 413 CB 576 in the Northern District of Texas because he assaulted me with his U.S. citizen slave so he can engage in genocide against state citizens in violation of your piece of shit felony statutes, 18 U.S.C. 1091, that you refuse to enforce unless you have some political agenda, and your edict under your military dictatorship. I filed a lawsuit against your coward bitch, Janet Napolitano, and her coward U.S. border pigs, and they refuse to accept service. And it's all with your approval and consent, with the approval and consent of your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member judicial whore buddies selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. And it continues. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, are noticed that I always prefer gold or silver coin, and I only use your military script, commercial paper, Federal Reserve notes, or their equivalent in the form of checks, money orders, etc., because I'm coerced into it, and your Wells Fargo bankster thieves have assaulted me, a man, for the crimes of your fraudulently created Sesticate Trust, and are taking reprisals against me in violation of your edicts under martial law, and you, the bought and paid for Roman cult bar member whore McBride, and others are their accomplices in their war crimes, and the banksters are compelling me to produce a social security number, thereby giving evidence against myself in violation of your edict under your military dictatorship, as if you owned me when they assaulted me with your regulations. and this is U.S. Constitution, Article 4, Section 2. The Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. And it's the same in Canada. Canadian Ownership and Control Determination Act says owned means subject to the regulations. And then there's the Government Corporation Operation Act of Canada. Every corporation, for all its purposes, is an agency of the bitch in right of Canada. When you, John McBride, dismissed case 414 CV 853A in the Northern District of Texas because I failed to pay your extortion. And that's Clearfield Trust Company case, again, that we read already once, thereby demonstrating that you intend to perjure your oath of office and that you have absolutely no intention of being a judge, and that you intend to be a bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge. And by using my failure to make a contract with you, then you further assaulted me with your regulations so you could sit there and play stupid in violation of your piece of shit felony statutes that you and your U.S. attorney pigs and FBI pigs refuse to enforce unless you have a political agenda, 18 U.S.C. 241 and 242, and your military dictatorship, so you can engage in genocide against state citizens in violation of your piece of shit felonies that you refuse to enforce unless you have a political agenda, 18 U.S.C. 1091, genocide, and your edicts under your military dictatorship, and it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member judicial horde buddies selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. So what he did is he dismissed a bunch of my cases because I didn't pay his extortion. And, yep.
Question.
Yeah.
Did you ask him, the judge, when he requested that you pay, did you ask him what form before you,
Actually, no, I didn't.
you didn't know?
I did that.
You didn't implement that at the time.
At the time, the latest one I did was the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, where I did send them the Form 1020,
Nice.
and they let the case proceed. But then they still assaulted me with their rules.
Well, okay, so you got one, that, you passed the first hurdle.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but they've actually, the Court of Appeals has let me proceed just on the affidavit that I send anyways. I sent them an affidavit. You know, I'm not a person. I'm not a U.S. citizen. You know, that kind of stuff.
So you don't have to pay.
So, yeah.
If they demand payment, one could.
So then, but the Form 1020 works really good because they don't, because that's under, that's bringing up their Uniform Commercial Code. They're operating in the Uniform Commercial Code. They're a private corporation. They're not legitimate. They're not real courts. And I mean, you would think that, I know they can be if they want to be, but they don't want to be, you know.
Can we make them be a real court?
I don't think you can. I mean, I've tried, certainly.
So we haven't found out how yet to compel them.
No,
to be
Congress,
a real court.
remember, Congress is an unconstitutional corporation. Penny Kelly in that video we're listening to, she said that Trump is operating behind the scenes. He's run the military. They've rescued a whole bunch of children. She said, whole bunch of children, and she said that Trump has been operating with the military, and she doesn't understand why people can't see that. The news media is obviously not letting anybody know. So I think he is the president of the republic. But anyways, she said that there's going to come a point in time when he's disappointed, though. And I think that's going to be when Congress adjourns for the last time. Because then the United States will break up. You see what I'm saying? That'll be very disappointing. If I was president and Congress adjourned for the last time, I don't know how that's all going to play out. From what the remote viewers and stuff said way back when, is that there come a point in time when there's wars, the United States breaks up, and then there's wars between the states. And then a North American Union emerges, and it's 13 states. And one will be Canada, one will be Mexico, and the other 11 will be what's left of the 50 American states. So I guess we'll see.
And they'll be de facto though, right?
Huh?
They will be de facto still.
No, they won't. No.
Really?
No, yeah. Then it'll be real.
Oh. And that's something positive in your view?
Well, the North American Union, I think. If Trump is able to restore the republic, then that'll be good too. The scenario that I saw with Trump restoring the public, or at least that Penny Kelly and other people have talked about, is that what happens is there's a period of time when there's only Trump as the president, and that's it. There's no Congress, and maybe that's what will happen. There'll be wars between the states, and there's a period of time that only Trump is president, and that's it. And then what happens is that Congress, they'll have to have another election, and many of the current senators and congressmen won't run because they won't want to live by the requirements of a republic. They won't be able to engage in the corruption that they're engaging in. You see what I'm saying? And they won't be able to, so they won't want to run. Some of them will be in jail, but even many of the ones that aren't in jail won't want to run. And so there'll be another election, and it'll be, I think, this was a couple of years ago, the post office patented oh, there we go. There we go. Anyways, the post office patented a blockchain voting process, I guess you might call it. So yeah, the post office patented, I don't know, it's blockchain voting method. And I mean, that'll be hack proof. That'll be impossible to counterfeit. That'll be possible to lie and cheat, like the Democrats did in this last election. Mm-hmm. And if you're not registered with the blockchain, then you ain't voting. There'll be no last minute voting, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Some sort of blockchain voting. Now, I'm not sure how that'll all work. I guess we'll see. But yeah, I heard that a couple of years ago. Post office patented it. So, they'll be able to make money that way. That's okay with me. I don't mind them making money doing something like that. I guess the political will has to be there to implement it. Right now they're doing all these investigations of all the election fraud. Yeah. So, anyways, I guess we'll see. So let's keep moving here. John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your Federal Express thieves have assaulted me, a man, for the crimes of your fraudulently created Sestake Trust, and are taking reprisals against me in violation of your edicts under your military dictatorship, Article 33, Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilians in time of war of 1949, and your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member whore Means and others are their accomplices in their war crimes, and Federal Express is compelling me to produce a Social Security number by assaulting me with your regulations in violation of your piece of shit felony statutes that you love to ignore unless you have some political agenda, 18 U.S.C. and 241 and 242, and thereby give evidence against myself in violation of your piece of shit Article 5 Amendment to your piece of shit Constitution that you love to ignore unless you have a political agenda, and your edict under your military dictatorship when Means dismissed case number 412 CV 638Y in the Northern District of Texas by further assaulting me with your regulations in violation of your piece of shit felony statutes that you love to ignore unless you have a political agenda, 18 U.S.C. 241 and 242, because I failed to do his electronic filing scam, which required part of a Social Security number, by using my failure to make a contract with him so he could sit there and play stupid in violation of your edicts under your military dictatorship so we could engage in genocide against state citizens in violation of your piece of shit felony statute that you love to ignore unless you have a political agenda, 18 U.S.C. 1091, and your edict under your military dictatorship, and it's all under with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member judicial whores selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, are noticed that your Roman cult bar member whores have assaulted me, a man, with the crimes of your fraudulently created Sesticate Trust, and are taking reprisals against me in violation of your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member whore McBride, and others are accomplices in their war crimes when McBride dismissed case 414 CV 993 in the Northern District of Texas because I failed to pay your extortion. And there's Clearfield Trust Company, again, cases talking about commercial paper, thereby demonstrating that you intend to perjure your oath of office and you have absolutely no intention of being a judge, and that you intend to be a bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge by assaulting me with your regulations and by using my failure to make a contract so you could sit there and play stupid and engage in genocide against state citizens in violation of your 18 U.S.C. 1091, and you magically got the case when you were named in it. And it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member judicial whores selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office. You lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your coward border pigs have assaulted me, a man, for the crimes of their fraudulently created Sesticate Trust, and are taking reprisals against me because of my political opinions. And their military uniforms and tactics are designed to be intimidating and terrorizing, and you're bought and paid for a Roman cult bar member whore McNamee and others of their accomplices in their war crimes, and they coerced me into giving evidence against myself and sent my wife into exile because she feels to be one of your slaves, a U.S. citizen, or have permission with a green card, when they know she's still an American national. And this is in repage. It's, however, true in all common law countries and has always and consistently been held that the wife and minor children take the nationality of the husband and father. That's common law doctrine. So your U.S. border pigs can convert it right into a privilege by holding my wife and sons and daughter hostage until I agree to their U.S. citizen slave status, by allowing them to convert it right into a privilege when I make application for their green card. When you're bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, McNamee became their accomplice in case CV02-2230-PHX-SMM in the District of Arizona because he assaulted me with his U.S. citizen slave so he could engage in genocide against state citizens in violation of your 18 U.S.C. 1091 genocide. And it's all with your approval and consent, the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member judicial whores selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or noticed that in your city of Azel pigs have assaulted me, a man, for the crimes of your fraudulently created Sesticate Trust, and are taking reprisals against me and their military uniforms and tactics designed to be intimidating and terrorizing, and you're bought and paid for a Roman cult bar member whores of their accomplices in their war crimes, and they coerced me to give evidence against myself in violation of and further assaulted me with their U.S. citizen slaves so they could engage in genocide against state citizens under your 18 U.S.C. 1091 piece of shit felony statutes. And these Hazel pigs further subjected me to deprivation of my immunities under color of so-called laws in violation of your piece of shit 18 U.S.C. 242 and your piece of shit 18 U.S.C. 241, conspiracy to violate rights. And it's all with your approval and consent, and your approval and consent of your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member judicial horse selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. Let's see, what time is it? 10:23. It's only half an hour. We'll get this done pretty quick. You, John H. McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge. Anyways, I don't know if I want to go through this whole thing. One of the things, this is a court case that got dismissed, and I'm basically blaming it on him because he's his bought and paid for a bar member scum are dismissing it. And this is another court case, a Texas court case, and because it makes so much business for his court, so then
So what's your ultimate goal of this particular case this is a bar grievance?
no, this is a nastygram.
So you just
It's just that you can send nastygrams. I think it gets their attention, quite frankly, and they've been like leaving me alone. I can tell you that.
it's basically to repel them.
Yeah, basically, yeah, yeah, because I tell them I'll resist their unlawful arrest, and I have the right to resist an unlawful arrest with lethal force if necessary, and I will. I'll be armed. We'll settle it right then and there. Bloodshed will be on his hands. And so I don't know. One of the things, this is, we won't cover them all. This is one of the things is because makes all business for his so-called court, and I go into some of the stuff like that's happened in restaurants, like I was at a Texas Roadhouse one time and I didn't want to wear a mask. And they said, we know who you are and you're either going to wear a mask or we're not going to serve you. And if you don't like it, sue us. So that was great to bring up. Yeah, and that's exactly what you intend. That's in here. It's because it makes so much business for your so-called court.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think personally, if you can keep going, but just you don't have to read every word, maybe. But if you get to some certain cases, like these cases are critical.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah, I agree.
Because then I can use them. Maybe not some of the other things you're doing. But...
Sure. This is you, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge. Or notice that you coward border pigs and you coward DHS DPS pigs and you coward city pigs engaged in war crimes by persecuting me for my political beliefs with your persecutions of me and anyone like me you label as freeman on the land status or sovereign citizen or anti-government. When we try to say we have rights, especially in light of the fact that all of North America west of the colonies, defined in the Royal Proclamation of 1763, is under military occupation, as defined by General Orders 100 in Texas, and all of the southern states are under military occupation since the Civil War, and California and Arizona are all Treaty of Hidalgo states are under martial law since the war with Mexico in the 1840s. And this is Article 1 of the Libre Code. A place, district, country occupied by an enemy stands in consequence of the occupation under the martial law of the invading or occupying army, whether any proclamation declaring martial law or any public warning to the inhabitants has been issued or not. Martial law is the immediate and direct effect and consequence of occupation or conquest. The presence of the hostile army proclaims its martial law. And then Article 2 says martial law does not cease during the hostile occupation except by special proclamation ordered by the Commander-in-Chief or by special mention in the Treaty of Peace concluding the war, when the occupation of a place or territory continues beyond the conclusion of peace as one of the conditions of the same. And you and your coward U.S. Congress pig buddies are further engaged in crimes by persecuting me and all other state citizens for our political beliefs. And I have no great love for United Nations Satanist buddies, but it is obvious to me that the reason you failed to accede to the Rome Statute is because you intend to engage in war crimes. You intend to engage in crimes against humanity. And it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member judicial whores selling their just us. Because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your U.S. Department of State pigs in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, conspired with the Canada Border Pigs to engage in war crimes and crimes against humanity against me in Canada, as evidenced by the affidavit of criminal complaint Jeff Sessions and his bought and paid for clerks masquerading as judge selling their just us. You know, I went and sent that to Trump, and let's see. The original of which was served on Donald J. Trump by registered mail, which also may be viewed at the link before. And so I uploaded it to Google Docs, and I put a link there because it's quite lengthy. It's like 250 pages. And so I didn't really want to attach it to this thing. You know what I mean? And it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for Roman cult bar member judicial horse selling their just us, you lying, perjuring Satanist MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. Anyways, Trump, after I sent that to him, he started coming out bad-mouthing Sessions. Sessions was the Attorney General. He started coming out bad-mouthing him. He ultimately removed him, and he refused to, endorse him or anything like that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That was kind of interesting. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that your Roman cult handlers created the Sestakay Trust, and yet still it was bound. This is that case of that, we'll read it anyways. Yet still it was bound difficult to set bounds to ecclesiastical ingenuity, for when they were driven out of all their former holes, they devised a new method of conveyance by which the lands were granted not to themselves directly, but to nominal fees to the use of the religious houses, thus distinguishing between the possession and the use and receiving the actual profits, while the season of the land remained in the nominal fee, who is held by the courts of equity, then under the direction of the clergy, to be bound in conscience to account to a Sestakay use for the rents and emoluments of the estate. This is all Roman cult, and it is to these inventions that our practitioners are indebted for the introduction of uses and trust, the foundation of modern conveyancing. Tomlin's Law Dictionary, 1835 edition. And the legal estate to be in the Sestakay use, that's in the DC Code at 31 Stat 1432. And you instruct your Roman cult bail priest clerks masquerading as judges to presume everybody is a Sestakay trust and dead, and the presumption of death at 31 Stat 1230. And it is those same Roman cult bail priests masquerading as judges who assault people with one of their so-called contracts, all of which is quite a scam, and it's all with your approval and consent, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that according to the website for the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas, your oath says that I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will administer justice without respect to persons, do equal right to the poor. I will faithfully discharge and perform the duties incumbent upon me as under the Constitution and laws of the United States. So help me God. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that the Constitution for the United States of America requires you to support the Constitution. And it says the senators, this is Article 6, Section 3, senators and representatives before mentioned, and members of the several state legislatures and all executive and all judicial officers, both the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. So that oath of office is not even constitutional. But I should know better to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect, dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that I am a man, and it's impossible for me to be a U.S. citizen under your edicts under martial law, because I'm white. And 42 U.S.C. 1982. All citizens of the United States shall have the same right in every territory, state, and territory as is enjoyed by white citizens thereof, to inherit, purchase, lease, sell, hold, convey real and personal property. And the 14th Amendment edict under martial law requires only persons born or naturalized in the United States. Section 1 in the 14th Amendment, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction are citizens of the United States. And the hearsay evidence say that showed that I was given birth in the soil of Alberta, Canada, which I have no first-hand knowledge of. But having said that, I do remember walking to school in Peace River, Alberta, about 600 miles north of the Montana border in the winter when it was 69 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. And I do remember finishing high school in 1975 in Raymond, Alberta, about 20 miles north of the Montana border. And neither have I been naturalized, because the sole order under your edicts under martial law is through the Attorney General and by taking an oath of allegiance, which I failed to do. And this is naturalization authority under 8 U.S.C. 1421. Neither am I a resident alien, because I failed to make application for a green card. But I did claim American nationality through United States Secretary of State by right of blood, because I have ancestors who were here prior to the War of Independence. Right of blood and kindred cannot be destroyed by any civil law. That power which is derived cannot be greater than that from which it is derived. All of which is evidence in the statement of original status that is in the affidavit of corporate denial. It's recorded with the Pinal County Recorder, which is now public policy in the unrebutted truth, a true copy of which is attached hereto, all of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety, which means I'm a free inhabitant as found in the Articles of Confederation. And that's Article 4 of the Articles of Confederation. The free inhabitants of each of these states, paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice accepted, shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of free citizens in the several states. And in 1871, Congress created an unconstitutional municipal corporation called United States of America to operate as government of the District of Columbia as an edict under martial law. And this is that Downs versus Bidwell case again that we talked about. And the unconstitutional municipal corporation fails to be the United States of America. The style of this confederacy, this is Article 1 of the Articles of Confederation. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that you're perjuring their oath of office by accusing me of being a U.S. citizen when there's no evidence that I am a U.S. citizen. And that's we therefore decline to overrule the opinion of Chief Justice Marshall. We hold that the District of Columbia is not a state within Article 3 of the Constitution. In other words, cases between citizens of the district and those of the states are not included in the catalog of controversies over which the Congress could give jurisdiction to the federal courts by virtue of Article 3. In other words, Congress has exclusive legislative jurisdiction over citizens of Washington District of Columbia, and through their plenary power nationally covers those citizens even when in one of the several states, as though the district expands for the purpose of regulating its citizens wherever they go throughout the states of the Union. And I have specifically stated I'm not a U.S. citizen, as evidenced in the statement of original status that is in the affidavit of corporate denial, which is recorded with the Pinal County Recorder at fee number 2013-032373, which is now public policy, the unrebutted truth, a true copy of which is attached here too, all of which is incorporated herein by reference in its entirety. And then Texas Rules of Civil Procedure, an allegation that a corporation is incorporated shall be taken as true unless denied by the affidavit of the adverse party, his agent or attorney, whether such corporation is public or private corporation and however created. Failure of any adverse party to deny under oath allegation that a party is a corporation dispenses with the necessity of proof of that fact. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. And it continues. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that you have demonstrated you intend to operate in your private capacity under the Clearfield Doctrine as a revenue officer under the Federal Tax Lien Act. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. Clearfield Doctrine is the Clearfield Trust Company. We've already read that case. And then the Federal Tax Lien Act, we've read that too as well. Talks about negotiable instruments and commercial paper. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or noticed that in 1871, bar members in the U.S. Congress set up an unconstitutional municipal corporation for the District of Columbia. And that's that Downs versus Bidwell dissenting opinion, and this Chisholm versus Georgia case that we already read. Therefore, the unconstitutional corporation in 1871 was set up after the existing model, and all governments at the time of the War of Independence were military dictatorships with various forms of despotism. And this is in despotic governments, the government has usurped in a similar manner both upon the state and the people. That case that hence all arbitrary doctrines and pretensions concerning the supreme, absolute, and uncontrollable power of government, and each man is degraded from the prime rank which he ought to hold in human affairs, and the latter the state, as well as the man is degraded. Of both degradations, striking instances occur in history, in politics, and in common life. Chisholm versus Georgia. And then the causes and necessities for taking up arms. Statutes have been passed extending the course of admiralty and vice-admiralty far beyond their ancient limits for depriving us of the accustomed and inestimable privilege of trial by jury in cases affecting both life and property, to supersede the course of common law, instead thereof to publish and order the use and exercise of the law martial, and for altering fundamentally the form of government established by charter, which saw the misery to which such despotism would reduce us, military dictatorship. And that's taken from the causes and necessities for taking up arms, 1775. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or noticed the Constitution for the United States of America is a trust indenture with delegated authority only. Governments are but trustees acting under derived authority and have no power to delegate what is not delegated to them. But the people, as the original fountain, might take away what they have delegated and entrust to whom they please. The sovereignty in every state resides in the people of the state, and they may alter and change their form of government at their own pleasure. Sovereignty is itself, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and source of law. But while sovereign powers are delegated to the agencies of government, sovereignty itself remains with the people, by whom and for whom all government exists and acts, which is delegated by people like me. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that there are three kinds of martial law. Full martial law used during an actual invasion, armed insurrection, troops on the street. Martial law proper, law of the armed forces, when a captain tells a sergeant what to do. And martial law rule, law of emergency and necessity. And it's used during peace times. Ex parte Milligan, U.S. Supreme Court. All police are military police. Martial law affects chiefly the police and the collection of public revenue and taxes. Whether imposed by the expelled government or by the invader, refers mainly to the support and efficiency of the army, its safety, and the safety of its operations. All military police are privateers operating on the high seas of commerce. A privateer is a vessel owned and operated by private persons, but authorized by a nation on certain conditions to damage the commerce of the enemy by acts of piracy. Or it's a sailor on a vessel. Privateering, international law, the act of arming privately owned merchant ships for the purpose of attacking enemy trading ships. Before the practice was outlawed, governments commissioned privateers by issuing letters of marque to their merchant fleets. Privateering was prohibited by the Declaration of Paris concerning naval warfare in 1856, which has been observed by nearly all nations since that time. Because they're all U.S. citizens from the District of Columbia. We therefore decline to overrule the opinion of Chief Justice Marshall. This is the National Mutual Insurance Company case versus Tidewater Transfer Company, U.S. Supreme Court, 1948, that we read previously. Operating under the international law rule adopted for areas under federal legislative jurisdiction, federalizes state civil law, including common law. This rule serves to federalize not only statutory, but the common law of state and federal venue discussed. Civil laws effective in an area of exclusive federal jurisdiction are a federal law, notwithstanding their derivation from state laws, and a cause arising under such laws may be brought in or removed to federal district court. And that's taken from a jurisdiction over federal areas within the states, report for the Interdepartmental Committee for the Study of Jurisdiction over Federal Areas within the states. Part 2, a text of the law of legislative jurisdiction submitted to the Attorney General and transmitted to the President in June 1957, pages 158 to 165. Because the law of war falls under international law. And this is General Orders 100, the Libra Code, Article 27. The law of war can no more wholly dispense with retaliation than can the law of nations, of which it is a branch. Martial law affects only subjects of the enemy and aliens. Article 7 of the Libra Code, martial law extends to property to persons, whether they're subjects to the enemy or aliens to that government, and subjects of government employees and corporations, anything created by the government. McCullough versus Maryland, 1819, all subjects over which the sovereign power of the state extends are objects of taxation, but those over which it does not extend are exempt from taxation. This proposition may also be pronounced as self-evident. The sovereignty of the state extends to everything which exists by its authority or its permission, or have received privileges by way of contract. The rights of sovereignty extend to all persons and things not privileged that are within the territory. They extend to all strangers resident therein, not only to those who are naturalized, but to those who are domiciled therein, having taken up their abode with the intention of permanent residence, but also to those whose residence is transitory. All strangers are under the protection of the sovereign while they are within his territory and owe a temporary allegiance in return for that protection. That's U.S. Carlisle versus United States, 1873. Let a state be considered as subordinate to the people, but let everything else be subordinate to the state. The term resident and citizen of the United States is distinguished from a citizen of one of the several states in that the former is a special class of citizen created by Congress. All subjects are subject to regulations and therefore property, and slaves are property. And this is Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the other property belonging to the United States. This is true in all corporations masquerading as governments. And so in Canada, the Canadian Ownership and Control Determination Act, own means subject to the regulations. Military jurisdictions of two kinds, statutes and common law of war. And that's Article 13, General Orders 100, or Libra Code. And all statutes, codes, rules, and regulations are edicts under martial law. And this non-ratification of the 14th Amendment by Judge A.H. Ella to the Utah Supreme Court in the case of Diet versus Turner. Note, under the law martial, only the criminal jurisdiction of a military court is the recognized law. But as Article 3 says, the civil courts can continue wholly or in part as long as the civil jurisdiction does not violate the military courts laid down by the commander-in-chief or one of his commanders. By this means, a military venue, jurisdiction, and authority are imposed upon the occupied populace under the disguise of the ordinary civil courts and officers of the occupied district or region, because the so-called civil authorities in an occupied district or region only act at the pleasure of the military authority. It should also be noted here that the several state legislatures, county boards of commissioners, and city councils are constantly legislating to please the edicts of the federal government, the occupying force, and that their legislation in this sense is not an exercise of state sovereignty, but instead a compliance with the edicts of the military force which occupies the several states, and consequently are edicts of martial law rule. With the so-called judge actually being a bought and paid for clerk masquerading as a judge, and you're proceeding under the Federal Tax Lien Act of 1966, when a clerk masquerading as a judge is an agent for the administrative agency, it's a kangaroo court. So we've gone through some of this. And it's a bill of attainder, means legislative acts, whatever their form, that apply either to named individuals or to easily ascertained members of a group in such a way as to inflict punishment on them without a judicial trial. So there's no such thing as judicial trial. So it's a bill of attainder and a bill of pains and penalties, which is a violation of the Constitution of the United States of America. And any bought and paid for clerk enforcing administrative law or pretending to be a judge does not have the authority to do anything judicial, like issue orders or warrants. And if any clerk pretending a judge attempts to do anything judicial, it's a fraud and a nullity. And they accept liability for all their actions. And their ministerial officers are incompetent to receive grants of judicial power from the legislature. Their acts in attempting to exercise such powers are necessarily nullities. When there's no jurisdiction, there's no judge. The proceeding is as nothing, and everything they do is brutum fulmen. Brutum fulmen, an empty noise, an empty thread, a judgment void upon its face, which is in legal effect no judgment at all, and by which no rights are divested, and from which none can be obtained, and neither binds nor bars anyone. That's Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. And all officials working under the unconstitutional corporation cease to represent the government. An officer who acts in violation of the Constitution ceases to represent the government. And again, because they're wanting Federal Reserve notes, they again cease to represent the government. Clearfield Trust Company. And officials working for an unconstitutional corporation are operating in their private capacity. All oaths must be lawful, allowed by common law or some statute. If they are administered by persons in a private capacity or not duly authorized, they are void. And so that's taken from Tomlin's Law Dictionary, 1835 edition, volume 2, but it's citing book 3 of Koch and book 4, which goes back to the 1500s. And all officials working for the unconstitutional corporation have no immunity. And so I went into some. Judge loses his absolute immunity from damage actions only when he acts in clear absence of all jurisdiction or performance of an act which is not judicial in nature. When enforcing mere statutes, judges of all courts do not act judicially and thus are not protected by qualified or limited immunity, but merely acts as an extension, as an agent for the involved agency, but only in a ministerial and not in a discretionary capacity. Immunity for judges does not extend to acts which are clearly outside their jurisdiction. And you have no duty to do anything unconstitutional. No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law. No courts are bound to enforce it. An unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties. Affords no protection. Creates no office. It is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed. An unconstitutional law is void and is as no law. An offense created by it is not a crime. And it never became a law and was as much a nullity as if it had been an act or declaration of an unauthorized assemblage of individuals. Where the state proceeds against a private individual in a judicial form, it's well settled. The state, county, municipality waives any immunity to counters, cross claims, and complaints by direct or collateral means regarding the matters involved. Therefore, you're involved in a seditious conspiracy in violation of your own codes. If two or more persons in any state or territory in any state subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down or to destroy by force the government of the United States or to levy war against them or to oppose any force the authority thereof, or by force prevent, hinder, delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. And you are engaged in treason. No, we have no more right to decline the exercise of jurisdiction than which is given than to usurp that which is not given. The one or the other would be treason to the Constitution. And perjuring your oaths, especially in light of the fact that officers of the court are presumed to know the law. Officers of the court have no immunity on violating a constitutional right, for they're deemed to know the law. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge. Notice that you order the clerk of the Fort Worth Division in northwestern Texas to give you all the cases I file into your so-called court. '28. We're on page 28. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that you intend that your bar member buddies bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, perjure their oaths, and operate in their private capacity and engage in multiple felonies, as evidenced in case 414 CV 993A that you dismissed because I failed to pay your filing fee extortion, and it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member Judicial horse selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, and notice that you intend that your Colleyville military police Gestapo thugs engage in the theft of my property and violate my rights under color of law and conspire together to threaten me, intimidate me, coerce me, injure me in the free exercise of my rights, and engage in official oppression, abuse of official capacity, as evidenced in case 319 CV 1460 that was filed in Northern District of Texas in Dallas and moved to Fort Worth as case 419 CV 632A that you dismissed because I failed to pay your extortion filing fee, and it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member Roman cult Judicial horse selling their justice, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, motherfucking son of a bitch. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, notice that you intend to conspire with your bought and paid for clerks masquerading as judges, Irma Carrillo Ramirez, to encourage the City of Lake Worth military police Gestapo and their Homeland Federal Bureau of Investigation handlers to engage in the theft of my property and violate the rights under color of law and conspire together to threaten, intimidate, coerce, injure me in the free exercise of my rights and engage in official oppression and abuse of official capacity, as evidenced in the case 319 CV 1986 that was dismissed because I failed to pay your filing fee extortion. And it's all with your approval and consent, and with the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member Roman cult Judicial horse selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, and notice that you intend to conspire with your bought and paid for clerks masquerading as judges Jeffrey Curtin in conspiracy with Reed O'Connor to encourage the City of Euless military police Gestapo and their Homeland Security Federal Bureau of Investigation handlers to engage in theft of my property and violate my rights under color of law, conspire to threaten, intimidate, coerce, and injure me in the free exercise of my rights, and engage in official oppression and abuse of official capacity, as evidenced in case 420 CV 161 that was dismissed because I failed to pay your filing fee extortion. And it's all with your approval and consent, and the approval and consent of your bought and paid for bar member Roman cult Judicial horse selling their just us, because I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that the Constitution for the United States of America require that I be provided with the Republican form of government, which fails to include military commissioners operating under General Orders 100. That's Article 13 of the Libre Code, and the Civil Affairs Military Government that we've already talked about. And a Republican form of government fails to include any star chambers, which we previously talked about. And a Republican form of government fails to include any statutes, codes, rules, or regulations, because all statutes, codes, rules, and regulations are edicts under martial law as described herein, but only to subjects of the enemy and aliens. And this is Dred Scott versus Sanford. But in considering the question before us, it must be borne in mind that there is no law of nations standing between the people of the United States and their government and interfering with their relation to each other. The powers of the government and the rights of the citizens under it are positive and practical regulations plainly written down. The people of the United States have delegated to it certain enumerated powers and forbidden it to exercise others. And there's other cite from Chisholm versus Georgia that we already talked about, which means you're busy imposing your Euless buddies' military despotism on me, and you already know that all about this, because officers of the so-called court are required to know the law. Officers of the court have no immunity from violating no immunity when violating a constitutional right, for they're deemed to know the law. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk, and notice that you can be a judge or a military commissioner under martial law, depending on what issues you're dealing with and whether you choose to honor your oath of office. But you cannot be both at the same time. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that it's impossible to pay your filing fee with Federal Reserve notes, because there is a distinction between a debt discharged and one paid. When discharged, the debt still exists, though divested of its character as a legal obligation during the operation of the discharge. And I've tried to use lawful money, gold or silver coin, with the clerk of the court told me they would convert it to Federal Reserve notes, which falls under international law with their Texas Business and Commerce Code and their Federal Tax Lien Act. Therefore, you intend to perjure your oaths and engage in treason by subjecting me to your commercial transaction. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, Satanist, treasonous mother MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, have demonstrated you intend to be a military commissioner by attempting to convert my case into a commercial transaction. And there's the Clearfield Trust Company cases. So you can call it a contract and use it as an excuse to nullify your oath of office and sit there and play stupid like military commissioners do. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, are noticed that you have demonstrated you intend to convert my right to justice into a privilege. The claim and exercise of a constitutional right cannot be converted into a crime. No state shall convert a right, a liberty, or a privilege, license it, and charge a fee therefor. There can be no sanction or penalty imposed because of one's exercise of constitutional rights. If the state converts a right or liberty into privilege, the citizen can ignore the license and fee and engage in the right or liberty with impunity. And if you think about it, filing fees are a license fee. That's what they are. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, are required to know that their regulations only apply to government employees. But I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. The Constitution for the United States requires that judges hold office during good behavior. That's Article 3, Section 1. The judges of both Supreme and inferior courts shall hold their office. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, are required to be neutral and unbiased. But I should know better than to think that you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that if you cannot be neutral and unbiased, you're required to recuse yourself under your District of Columbia Codes, 28 U.S.C. Section 455. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, have demonstrated that you intend to be military commissioners working for the executive branch of government to collect your royalties under 31 Stat 1366. But I should know better than to think that you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, have demonstrated that you intend to be in bad behavior. Fraud upon the court is fraud which is directed to the judicial machinery itself. It is not fraud between the parties or fraudulent documents, false statements, or perjury. It is where the court or a member of the court is corrupted or influence is attempted, or where the judge has not performed judicial function, where the impartial functions of the court have been directly corrupted. By choosing to be a bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, as described herein, and therefore engage in honest services fraud in violation of 18 U.S. Your District of Columbia Codes, 18 U.S.C. 1346. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, are required to know that your rules are only for your bar member scum buddies. Officers of the court have no immunity in violating a constitutional right, for they're deemed to know the law. But I should know better than to think that you would honor your oath of office, you lying, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, intend to perjure your oath. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, have demonstrated you intend to subject me to the deprivation of my right to justice and my immunity to your filing fee extortion racket in violation of 18 U.S.C., your piece of shit 18 U.S.C. 242 under color of your regulations. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, have demonstrated you intend to subject me to the deprivation of my oh, that's just the same thing. Huh. That's interesting. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, have demonstrated you intend to conspire with your U.S. military police and your bar member buddies, Cox and Stoles, and all the respondents in all the previous cases that you dismissed to threaten me, intimidate, coerce me, and injure me in the free exercise of my rights in violation of your 18 U.S.C. 241. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, have demonstrated you intend to use your military dictatorship to engage in a seditious conspiracy and in violation of 18 U.S.C. 2384. By using your military despotism to overthrow my common law right to justice and your military dictatorship by imposing your military despotism on me. But I should know better than think that you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, motherfucking son of a bitch. No disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge or not a judge, and everything you do is a fraud and a nullity. Ministerial officers are incompetent to receive grants of judicial power, and from the legislature they're acting and attempting to exercise such powers are necessarily nullities. Where there is no judge, there is no where there is no jurisdiction, there is no judge. The proceeding is as nothing such has been the law from the days of Marshal Sale. And everything you do is brutum fulmen. Brutum fulmen's an empty noise, a judgment void upon its face, which is in legal effect no judgment of all, and by which no rights are divested, and from which none can be obtained, neither binds nor bars anyone. And your orders are absolutely void and a nullity. A void judgment is one from which its inception was a complete nullity and without legal effect. A void judgment is one which has no legal force or effect whatever. It's an absolute nullity. Its invalidity may be asserted by any person whose rights are affected at any time and any place. It need not be attacked directly, may be attacked collaterally whenever and wherever it's interposed. A void judgment insofar as it purports to be announcement of court is an absolute nullity. A void order may be attacked either directly or collaterally at any time. Not every action by any judge is an exercise of judicial function. It's not a judicial function for a judge to commit an intentional tort, even though the tort occurs in the courthouse. When a judge acts as a trespasser of the law, when a judge does not follow the law, the judge loses subject matter jurisdiction and the judge's orders are void and of no force and effect. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that I do not waive any rights at this time, nor do I intend to waive any of my rights any time, under any jurisdiction, under Bill of Rights or by writ of rights. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, that I have reserved all rights as an American citizen and to Declaration of Independence, 1776, the original Constitution of 1778, which gave rights to all men as to persons, corporations, et al., as with discrimination, but we the people as secured parties are now under hardship by the bar associations as to legal disabilities due to discrimination under their color of law violations, violate at 18 U.S.C. 241, 242, and 246. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that you intend to conspire with your bar member buddy, Texas Governor Abbott, to issue edicts under his medical military dictatorship requiring all persons to wear face masks with the intent to subject me to the deprivation of my right not to be subject to your color of law violation and in violation of your piece of shit felony 18 U.S.C. 242 with the intent to conspire together with Abbott and Treasure City Flea Market in Waco, Texas on 19th of July 2020 at approximately 8 a.m. to threaten me, injury, coerce me, intimidate me in the free exercise of my right in violation of your piece of shit felony 18 U.S.C. 242. When I told them it's a felony and they said they were just doing it, what they were told, I asked them if they would murder somebody too. And if somebody told them to, but I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that you intend to conspire with your bar member buddy, Texas Governor Abbott, to issue edicts under his medical dictatorship requiring all persons to wear face masks with the intent to subject me to the deprivation of my right not to be subject to your color of law in violation of your piece of shit felony 18 U.S.C. 242 with the intent to conspire with Abbott and Pancho's Restaurant at 6238 Rue Snow in North Richland Hills, Texas on 23rd of July 2020 at approximately 11 a.m. to threaten me, injure me, coerce me, intimidate me in the free exercise of my right in violation of your piece of shit felony 18 U.S.C. 242. When I told them it's a felony and they said they were just doing what they're told. And I asked them if they would murder somebody too, if somebody told them to. But I should know better than to think that you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that you intend to conspire with your bar member buddy, Texas Governor Abbott, to issue edicts under his medical military dictatorship requiring all persons to wear face masks with the intent to subject me to the deprivation of my right not to be subject to your color of law in violation of your piece of shit felony 18 U.S.C. 242 with the intent to conspire together with Abbott and Walmart at Hearst, Texas on 11 July 2020 at approximately 6 p.m. to threaten me, injure me, coerce me, and intimidate me in the free exercise of my right in violation of your piece of shit felony 18 U.S.C. 241. That should be 241. When I told them it's a felony and they said they were just doing what they're told. And I asked them if they would murder somebody too, if somebody told them to. But I should know better than to think you would honor your oath of office, you lying, perjuring, treasonous, Satanist, MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, notice that you intend to conspire with your bar member buddy, Texas Governor Abbott to issue edicts under his military dictatorship. So this is the same thing. This is the U.S. Postal Service employee Travis Creech at 1300 Harwood in Bedford, Texas on 2020 at 11:30 to threaten me. And so this is all face mask stuff. And Linda at the Golden Corral in 7660 Grapevine Highway, North Richland Hills, 13th of July 2020 at 11:30 a.m., forcing me to wear a face mask. Denny's Restaurant, North 1830 North Central Expressway in Texas, 21 July 2020, approximately 6:30 p.m. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that remote viewers have said there's going to come a point in time when there'll be riots in every major city, and then Congress will adjourn for the last time, and a great nation will cease to exist in one day, and then there'll be wars between the states. And I completely understand how you intend to do everything you can so people lose confidence and trust in the government to make that happen, and that will be a very sad day indeed. But the good thing is that will come out of it is that your military dictatorship will end, common law will return, and then people will be looking to find people that caused all of this to introduce them to common law justice at the end of a rope. And if a man be found stealing any of his brethren or the children of Israel, maketh merchandise of him or selleth him, then that thief shall die, and thou shalt put evil away from among you. You, John McBride, are notice that I, if anything contained herein is disputed, it must be disputed with a counter affidavit with a declaration under penalty of perjury. You, John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge, or notice that if you and your bought and paid for whores selling their just us think you own me, as demonstrated by your assaulting me with your fictitious color of law regulations and your coward border pigs and your coward IRS pigs, or your coward U.S. Marshal pigs, or your coward DHS DPS pigs, or your coward city pigs, or your coward sheriff pigs. All you need to do is name a date, time, and place. I'll come armed. We can settle it for once and for all. And if they get me first, then great, because the sooner I'm out of this fucking hole, the better. Give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry, after witnessing a man flogged to death for refusing to take the license. And if I blow your pig's brains out first, then the first words out of my mouth will, gee, I am so sorry. I thought he wanted to do a commercial transaction. You motherfucking son of a bitch. No disrespect to dogs intended. And any bloodshed will be on your hands. John McBride, bought and paid for a clerk masquerading as a judge. We were all here before this universe was created, and we'll all be here when it goes away. And before God, angels, and anyone who reads this as a witness, I shake the dust of the earth, mop my feet against you, as found in Matthew 10 and 14, Mark 6 and 11, Luke 9 and 5. And we'll be talking about this on Judgment Day, because I should know better than to think you'd honor your oath of office, you treasonous Satanist MFSOB, no disrespect to dogs intended. So that was sent on the 24th of July, 2020, and this is the actual notice and demand that I sent him back in 2012. And so that's attached. Yeah, and it had a corporate denial affidavit attached too. And this is the corporate denial affidavit. So now let's go and look at how the court responded, because I think you'll find this interesting. This is the court clerk's answer. Now, to understand, notice the name is up in lowercase. I was in Arizona when this was sent, and my private email, that is a private mailbox there, and whenever when I get packages and stuff, they always send me emails. So they sent me an email when I got this. I was in Arizona at the time, and I thought, I wonder what that's about. And I know I sent that letter out. This was I mailed them on the 4th and the 10th is when they got them. This was in January, 20th of January, when I got this letter. And so if you think about it, they had it for 3 months. 3 months, September, all of September, October, November, all 4 months. They'd had it 4 months, almost 5 months. And I got this. And so I wasn't sure what this was all about. They sent me a letter saying I got something from the U.S. District Court. Actually, they sent me an email. My postal people sent me an email saying, and I was thinking, well, I don't know what that is. Is it a summons because they want me to show up in court for some reason? Because I did say, but I can't go there armed. I was sitting there thinking about all that. Anyways, so I didn't know what it was. I was kind of curious. I checked the tracking and because it actually, I thought it had tracking. It may not have, and maybe it did. Maybe they got it mixed up. I remember checking some tracking, and the tracking was like from Vermont, and I was thinking, what the heck is it coming from Vermont more? Maybe it's that U.S. attorney this was Trump, right? That U.S. attorney was working for Trump up in Vermont. Maybe it had something to do with that. Anyways, so I didn't know what it was. I was sitting there thinking, what the heck is this all about? And anyways, when I got there, I went and this is what it said. It said, you have more than one case pending in the Northern District of Texas, and your documents do not provide a case number. Please write the correct case number on your documents and return them for filing. The documents may be filed into only one case. If you want to file in more than one case, you must provide separate copies for each case. I thought, so that's what I did is I made copies and I filed it and I sent them back. They sent me my documents back. And so there was actually one that I'd sent to McBride and then another one I'd sent to O'Connor. That was another judge that I was dealing with. So there was, I sent them both back and I went and wrote the case number across the top and put a copy of this letter in the box when I sent it back, and no problem, filed it into the case. That's all it said. It doesn't even have a date. It's interesting. But this is the letter they sent me. So I was basically saying he dismissed the case, says you have more than one case pending. So those cases were dismissed. Well, I guess they're not dismissed because I sent that nastygram and I said that's a void judgment. That's not a case. That's not dismissed. It's void. If you can't be neutral and unbiased, then you can't be involved in the case. And so I nailed it down pretty good there, I think. Anyways, so that's what happened. Now, the only thing I can suggest is if you want the Word files for these, send me an email. If you're going to do something like this, just make sure there's no threats or nothing that looks like a threat, and just go through and lay it out.
They explain you shouldn't.
So, anyways, it is about it's after it's 12:30, so it's time to take a break for lunch. We will adjourn again or start again around 2:00. And so we're going to end the stream now, and we'll start again at 2:00. All right. And thanks for watching. And You got to be careful when you do these. I wouldn't recommend anybody do these. You got to be careful, and don't do them all the time. I don't do them that often, but once in a while I'll do one. And just got to be the right situation, I guess you might say. He went and dismissed a bunch of my cases, and so I was basically saying that's a fraud. It's not dismissed. So, anyways, now I'm going to file, but now I'm filing bar grievances, and I'm filing bar grievances against judges too. And I highly recommend bar grievances anytime you're dealing with anything to do with these criminals. Bar grievance. There's always a lawyer behind it. File a bar grievance. Anyways, thanks for watching. We'll see you this afternoon.